Please come get your super annoying kid. Katie looked at her text and sighed. She couldn't send that. She drew a deep breath and tried again. Hi. It's 12:20. Everything okay? I think the boys are ready for their naps. She sent it. She didn't know Heather very well yet. They'd met at the library story time, and their boys had sat next to each other. After several weeks of seeing each other there, Heather suggested a playdate for the boys. Your house or mine? We can swap the next time, she had said. They had agreed on a morning playdate at Katie's house, and Heather would pick up her son Brian no later than noon. Well, she was late. Katie hoped that Heather would text back. Now, after all the play and the lunch, the boys were tired. Katie sighed. Since she didn't know if or when Heather would respond to her text, she said, "Boys, it's nap time." "I want to nap at my house," protested Brian. "I know. I think your mommy will be here soon. But while we wait, let's rest. You can lie down on the couches in the family room." Judging by his behavior earlier in the day, Katie braced herself for a tantrum from Brian. Surprisingly, he didn't put up a fight. It took only a few minutes to settle the boys, and soon they were both sleeping. Well, at least the kid is used to naps, Katie thought with relief. At 1:04, Heather rang the doorbell. Katie expected an apology or some sort of acknowledgement of being late, but Heather only flashed a big smile, and asked, "Did they have fun?" Katie answered, "Well, yes, but..." Heather was quick to cut her off. "Sorry, but I have to run. I'll just grab Brian." "Where is he?" "They are both sleeping," Katie said. "Wow. They did have fun. Well, good, I'll just rouse him and go. Thanks for putting him down for a rest." She pushed past Katie and said, "Where to?" with a breezy, carefree attitude. "Just go through the kitchen and then turn right." Heather gently woke her son and walked with him to the front door. "See you at story time on Thursday. Is Saturday okay for me to have the boys for playdate number 2? Yeah, that's fine," Katie answered, unsure of what to think of Heather. Why didn't she say anything about being an hour late? She couldn't have forgotten. They had agreed with text messages. And she had confirmed the time when she dropped Brian off. After Heather was gone, Katie sat down with a cup of tea and thought about the morning. It had started off fine, but Brian soon showed that he was quick to get into things he shouldn't, and he didn't listen when he was told no. He pounded his fists on the piano. He jumped on the furniture. He yelled. Going outside helped only a little. He ran to the wooden fence and kicked it repeatedly. He picked up mulch and threw it. Katie rubbed her temples. Maybe it was just because it was his first day at her house. She would give him a second chance. Perhaps next time she'd insist that Heather stay, too. They could visit with each other while the boys played. On Thursday the boys sat together for story time. Katie and Heather sat in the back and sipped their iced coffees. "I love that a library does this," whispered Heather. "That librarian is so talented. Look at the way she's captivated the kids." Katie looked. It was true, for most of the kids anyway. A few seemed a bit too young to be in the group, and every now and then a young one would stand up and run back to the parent. Ben and Brian sat together, smiling at each other when the book had funny lines. After the story time, Heather said, "So, 10 o'clock to about noon this Saturday at our house?" Katie smiled. She was glad that Heather was the one to bring it up. "Yes," she answered. "Ben will love that." "Thanks. I can pick him up and drop off if you want. I'm planning to see my mom after the playdate, and your house is actually on the way." "You're sure? That's very nice of you." "Very sure. I promise it's no problem at all," said Heather. Ben could hardly sleep on Friday night. "Tomorrow I go to Brian's house?" "Yes," said Katie. "Is his house big?" he asked. "I don't know." Katie smiled. "But I'm sure you'll have fun." "I can't wait," he said. He paused for a moment and then gave her a big grin and said, "And I get to ride in their car?" Katie wondered for a moment what it was like to feel so much excitement about something so small. She couldn't help smiling back at Ben. "Yes. Won't that be fun?" Ben nodded. Shortly before 10 o'clock on the following morning, Katie said, "Let's get your booster out now, so that it's ready." They went outside and opened the back seat of the car. Katie was happy to see that there were no crumbs on it. Not allowing crackers or cookies in the back seat did pay off sometimes. Non-crumbly snacks were allowed, and it made for easy cleanup. They spent the next several minutes playing in the front yard. Ben wanted to watch as the car came to their house. Heather was true to her word and pulled up to the house right at 10 o'clock. Brian waved frantically at Ben, and yelled, "Hiya, Ben. Ready for a totally awesome day?" Ben laughed. Katie took his hand and walked with him to the car, carrying the booster with the other hand. She helped Ben in, and then she gave Heather a smile. "Thanks. Apparently, the car ride is the most exciting part of this," said Katie. "Well, I remember being a kid," laughed Heather. "And hey, we might as well enjoy these days when our boys are so easy to please." "Absolutely," agreed Katie. "Okay, then. We'll be back around noon. Sound good?" "Yes, thanks," answered Katie. Katie watched as the car pulled away. Ben gave her only a brief wave. He was focused on Brian. She went back inside and picked up a book that she'd been wanting to read. After an hour, she decided to soak in the tub. The morning was so completely relaxing, and she decided to enjoy it. After her bath, she dressed and went back to the kitchen. It was 11:40. Perfect. She'd have time to get 2 sandwiches and some soup ready in case Ben didn't have lunch. She thought briefly that she probably should have asked Heather about lunch beforehand, but then decided it wasn't a big deal either way. Noon came and went. At 12:15, Katie started to get nervous. "Everything okay?" she sent in a text. At 12:30 there was still no answer from Heather. 12:45. 1 o'clock. 1:15. Katie called 911. She tried to explain. The dispatcher couldn't seem to grasp how serious the situation was. "Are you sure your friend isn't just running late?" She could be. "We're not super close friends. We know each other because of story time at the library. Our little boys get along well," Katie stammered. "Okay. Did you drive to her house?" asked the dispatcher. Katie sighed. She knew she was going to sound so foolish. She was so foolish to let him go without asking for Heather's address. Somehow, it had seemed natural at the time to just let Heather pick him up. "I don't know her address." There was silence for a moment, and Katie could feel the woman's judgment through the phone. How could a mother let her kid go with someone she didn't know well? How could a mother let her kid go to a home that she'd never even seen? Katie knew she'd think the same of anyone else. "Ma'am, an officer will be there in a few minutes." Soon after, 2 officers rang the bell. "Come in," said Katie. "Why don't you walk us through the day?" said Officer Cooper. Katie gave as many details as she could, and she showed the officers her phone with the unanswered text messages. They listened carefully to her whole story. "Have you ever seen her be violent?" asked Officer Kelly. No, of course not," answered Katie. "Has she ignored texts before?" Katie thought back to the other play date. "Well, yes. When her son was at my house, she came an hour late to get him and she didn't respond to my texts." Officer Kelly nodded. "Okay. That's good to know. Maybe today is similar to that day. She might be the type who just doesn't pay attention to texts." The officers wrote down everything that Katie could tell them, including Heather's name and number. Officer Cooper said, "Excuse me for just a moment," and then stepped outside. Then he made a phone call to the library. He knew one of the librarians very well and asked to speak to her. "Hi, Lucy. Glenn Cooper here." "Hi. How can I help you, officer? Lucy asked cheerfully. We have a problem that I am hoping you can help us with. All right. What's up? During your story hour, have you noticed two women sitting together? He described Katie and gave the descriptions that Katie had given him for Heather. They each have a little boy, both with blonde hair. No, not that I've noticed. It's strange that you would talk about the story hour, though. One woman, and she matches the description of one of the women you just told me about, tall, thin, and very long light brown hair. Katie, Officer Cooper interrupted. Yes. Okay. Well, a woman who looks like that does come for story hour, but she comes alone. At first, we thought she was waiting for someone, but every week she shows up and just listens along with everyone else, but she doesn't have a kid with her. Thanks, Lucy, said Officer Cooper. Then he hung up. This was definitely strange. He looked down at the information he had. He stepped back into the house and took a more careful look. There were photos and toys, but not really any mess. No hand marks on the walls. No dirt on the tiny shoes lined up by Katie's shoes. He pulled up the number that Katie had said belonged to Heather. And there it was, a faint ring. Katie stood very still, looking surprised and confused. Officer Cooper said very quietly, very calmly, Katie, where is the phone that is ringing? She didn't answer, but he went toward the sound. It led him to a door that was slightly ajar. It was a child's room. It was perfect. Nothing was out of place. In fact, it looked more like a staged room than a room in which a little boy played. On the dresser was a phone that was ringing.